Hi, perhaps you recognize me. It's your favorite president.
We will decide who comes to this country and the circumstances in which they come.
I mean,
I know you want to ban our national flags, but we're going to wave you goodbye.
And we will make America great again.
What does confrontational mean? It means you fight for what you believe.
It is not merely our privilege to be strong, it is our duty to be strong.
Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Commanding the Narrative. My name is Stephen Tripp. Welcome everyone who are watching us live on Facebook, Rumble, and tonight also on the CIBUK YouTube channel. Welcome to all of you in the UK watching us live. I know you've been through a big few weeks of election campaigns and a big election in the last couple of days. We're going to be breaking all that down tonight, your morning. It's night here in Australia, but welcome very much. If you are watching live, you can contribute. You can comment in the live chat, ask a question, make a comment, let your voice be heard. Also, at some stage, I'll put the link for StreamYard in the chat. If you want to click that link, you'll be able to call in. You can use your phone. You can use your laptop. It's almost like talkback radio used to be. Instead, I call it talkback streaming. So all you have to do is just click that link, and you can come on and have your say as well. But before we get started, I'll kick it off like we always do, just by letting you know about how you can support us here at Commanding the Narrative, and that is through Buy Me a Coffee. So if you want to throw a few dollars our way, you can head to Buy Me a Coffee and contribute in that way. It's completely up to you. It's just a nice way of you being able to help us pay for the stream, and we set up a website, which I'll get to shortly. All that costs money these days. It also gives me a warm and fuzzy feeling inside seeing that email saying that someone's donated. So that's a good way of people being able to support us by heading to Buy Me a Coffee. You can also head to our t-shirt shop as well and get yourself a Commanding the Narrative t-shirt. If you want to look stylish out on the streets and really get people's attention, head to xcandidates.tshirts.net.au and you can get your very own t-shirt. And that, again, as I said, helps support us. And this week I've launched a brand new website. It's the Commanding the Narrative website. You can head there if you want to stay up to date with everything that we're doing with the podcasts, articles, everything like that. Head to commandingthenarrative.com. Look, a lot of people say to me with social media, our stuff just doesn't pop up for them. They say, I don't see your podcast pop up on Facebook or Instagram or Rumble or it's not Rumble, but all the social media sites. Now you can head to Commanding the Narrative. You can click the sign up button at the top there, and you'll get a weekly newsletter just letting you know about all the podcasts that we've done throughout that week. Also, any articles that I've written or any other interesting news, events, whatever it might be for that week, you can stay up to date with us. That's another way that you can support us here at Commanding the Narrative. So please check that out. But very privileged tonight. I've got what I think is one of the best political commentators and analysts out there, especially in the UK. He's the chairman of CIBUK, the Campaign for an Independent Britain, and also the chairman of Facts4EU, the most prolific researcher and producer of information in the world based on the UK. His name is Leigh Evans. We've had him on before. I suggest you go back and watch episode 3 of Commanding the Narrative to hear a little bit more about Leigh, but let's bring him on now. Mr. Leigh Evans, welcome back to Commanding the Narrative.
Thank you, Stephen. It's a pleasure.
Now, it's been I'm sure it's been a massive few weeks for you over there in Britain with this election. Just on an emotional level for you, with you, your team, maybe some of your friends and colleagues around you, what's the feeling amongst all of you now that you've had this big switch in government in the UK?
I'd say it's pretty mixed, actually. Different people have different views about it. We now have what will turn out to be a radically new government. And at the moment, we're absorbing the results that we've seen from Thursday's election. And they're incredibly interesting. It's probably one of the most interesting election results that we've had in about 100 years.
It definitely has been. I mean, it's been a real shift when you compare it to the last election in 2019. It's quite amazing. It's especially amazing for us here in Australia watching it, because we're not living the day-to-day life of political, what's happening politically in the UK and just the day-to-day life that's going on there. So we just maybe get snippets here and there. Suddenly you've got this Conservative government with Boris Johnson. There's a little bit of stuff going on with Liz Truss and now Rishi Sunak and now with the Labor government. It all seems to have happened out of nowhere. Has it been a long journey, or has this been a sudden shift for the UK?
Oh, we've been on an amazing journey over the last 8 years, Stephen, and we've been through a lot of ups and downs. We went through a government that was effectively trying to reverse the decision of the largest majority in political history in the United Kingdom, and that was the UK-EU referendum, the in-out referendum. And as you know, we voted out, which has enabled us now to start rebuilding relations with Australia and the rest of the Commonwealth, which is very exciting. But unfortunately, we had a government led by Theresa May and her Remainer colleagues. We call them Remainers, by the way, in the UK, or Remainer rejoiners. And those are effectively people that didn't like the decision of the British people to leave the EU and didn't accept it. And they tried manfully and womanfully to overturn that result. And right at the head of that, of course, was the shadow minister, as he then was, and now Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer. And we'll probably come back to that.
Yes, definitely. I want to start off by pointing out some big differences between the UK and Australia when it comes to the political system, just purely for the Australian audience, just so they can understand a little bit better what we're going to be talking about. The first main thing is you have a first-past-the-post system in the UK. We have a preferential system here in Australia. We can maybe talk about that later, because that comes into play quite significantly with a lot of these results. Some of the other points is in the UK, your Labor Party is spelt with a U, ours is not. So it's the traditional English spelling of Labor. One thing you introduced there was voter ID, which I would like to get your thoughts on, maybe just briefly now. Was there a concern about voter fraud going into the election? Is that why this was brought in? I feel like it's a necessary thing that needs to happen here in Australia. Supposedly it's racist for us to have a voter ID. I don't understand how that's the case, but it seems like everything's racist these days. What was the main reason why that was brought in the UK?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's why. And unfortunately, it's necessary these days. We're not particularly in favour of people having to carry ID at all times. But when you go and vote, that is such a significant issue. And we don't see any kind of problem with having to show who you are. And there are so many forms of ID available. We're not talking about a national ID card. There's about 30 different IDs you can show, from driving license to your water bill, you name it. So it's hardly a difficult bar to cross, but it is an improvement. What they didn't do, and you might want to come back to this, is they didn't repeal the postal ballots system that Tony Blair introduced. So some 20% odd of votes in our election were via postal ballots, which is substantially open to fraud and to intimidation. And that's something that we feel should be changed immediately.
Well, specifically with the first past the post system, because some of these results can come down to a few votes, a few percentage. So it is a concern. I mean, I'm glad that you have the voter ID system, because I think it's something that we should immediately introduce here in Australia. But a couple of the other things, the big differences is your parliament is the House of Commons there is 650 seats compared to Australia, which is 151. We're 151 right now, soon to go to 150, but it's still a huge difference. And I've been in the House of Commons, and it doesn't hold 650 MPs. So a lot of those people have to sit in another room or just sit out at the time, which is remarkable in my view. The House of Lords, though, that's not up for election. So it's not like here in Australia where an election here includes the Senate, which is our upper house. It doesn't work like that in the UK. Is that right?
That's correct. For many years now, there have been suggestions that we should reform the House of Lords, and I think that's probably the right thing to do. But just to be clear, the election that we're talking about today is an election for MPs to the House of Commons. And you're quite right that 650 MPs do not fit easily into a chamber which takes about 420.
It's just, it's very, it's a sight to see. That's why they look like they're they're crammed in like sardines when you see footage of the UK Parliament.
It's historical. We have many anachronisms, as most of your Australian viewers will know. We have all kinds of old-fashioned traditions, and it just happens to be one of them. But the big question is, with 400 and whatever it is, 20-odd Labour MPs, how on earth are they going to all sit on the government benches? Because there isn't enough room.
Yeah, that's correct. One of the other big differences, you have non-compulsory voting in the UK. I think Australia is one of the few nations that has compulsory voting, and this was a uniquely low turnout. I've read in one of your articles. Why do you think that is? Why do you think the turnout was so low?
I think it was the none of the above category that won out. In other words, a large proportion of the electorate had no desire to vote for either of the two main parties. And so we ended up with a turnout, I think it was somewhere in the region of 59%, one of the lowest that we've ever had. And you're absolutely right, Stephen, as ever. Australia has a compulsory voting system. We don't. It's entirely voluntary. People are encouraged to vote, but that's about it. And not many were inspired to vote this time around.
How do you feel about that? Because my initial thought is that could be open to fraud, because if you're only having 60% of the population voting, you could potentially have all sorts of people going in and voting on behalf of others. I mean, I guess the voter ID would fix that now, but how do you feel about non-compulsory voting? Is it a good thing, or should we be forcing people in the UK to vote and contribute to the democratic process?
Well, I'm a bit of a libertarian, so my view personally would be that we allow people to do what they want, and we simply encourage them to use their democratic right, because after all, that was a democratic right that was won through blood, sweat and tears in the Second World War, when not just British troops or American troops, but a lot of Australian and Commonwealth troops succeeded in taking back the continent and reinstalling democracy there. So, for me, I think we We just need to get that through to the younger generation, that this is the heritage that they have, and they should use it. But I'm not in favour of making that compulsory. No.
To get to Facts4EU, which I tried to do a lot of research in the lead up to this interview, and then you just come out with these articles that just basically I don't need to do any research because these articles just are comprehensive, they're to the point, and I don't have to do any work at all. You do all the work at your end. But this is you've written 2 in the last 2 days. You put out one every day. This is the first one. This is right in the aftermath of the election. And I love this thumbnail that you've got here. You've got the sun sets on Sunak. You've got him looking down, very depressed. I'm sure he is very depressed right now with the way that he's led the Conservative Party to this loss. I want to read out these highlights that you've listed here. So we mentioned the very low turnout. You've said Starmer storms to victory as expected, but not by as much as the polls suggested. Worst ever result for the Conservatives. Nigel Farage's Reform UK came from nowhere to third of the vote share, a huge success. Nigel Farage himself was elected to Clacton with a massive swing. Jeremy Corbyn, who was the former Labor leader and a Marxist, as you've written here, is now an independent MP, and he defeated Labor to get his seat. The LibDems secure 18 times the number of reform seats despite winning far less votes, which is interesting, and we can go into that a little bit later. And Keir Starmer suffers the humiliation of a fall of 17% in his own electorate. So it's not, I mean, it's not a real comprehensive victory as it might seem. There's still problems out there for Labor, isn't there?
Yeah, it's very interesting. Clearly, the media is all obsessed with how Keir Starmer is setting up his new government and who his cabinet ministers are going to be. But I think that because this is such a pivotal election, we should actually look at what happened and who achieved what. And for me, I suppose one of the interesting things that is not, by the way, a lot of the uncomfortable truths about this election are not covered by the BBC. They will not be covered by Australian outlets that rely on the BBC for their information. Now, I know, Stephen, that you have the same issue that we have in the UK with regard to the mainstream media. But there are some significant questions to be asked and answered about this election. The simple fact is this was not an election that Labour won. It was an election that the Conservatives lost. And I say that based on hours and hours of extensive research into the raw data that we've been conducting and still are. But that is the simple fact for your Australian viewers, that the Labour Party barely increased their vote share. It was the Conservatives that lost vote share, and that's why we have the result we have.
Well, I've done something very dangerous. I've put the link in the chat. If anyone wants to call in and have your say or ask Leigh a question, just click that StreamYard link. As I said before, you can use your phone, you can use your laptop, any way that you want to join us. I call it Talkback Streaming. You can be part of this conversation. Just click that link and call in. But Leigh, you use a lot of graphs and a lot of imagery in your articles on Facts4EU. I'm going to bring up a couple of them just to set the scene of what we've just alluded to. So this is the UK election results. Now, this was correct as of yesterday, so it might have changed slightly, but it was a pretty comprehensive victory with Labor at almost 34%, which I mean, 34% is not overwhelming, but they did manage to pick up 412 seats based on that percentage there. The Conservatives are down to 23.7%, and they picked up 121 seats. Now, the really interesting thing here is that Reform UK picked up 14.3% of overall votes, and the LibDems picked up 12.3%. But the LibDems have 71 seats, and Reform only have, is it 4 or is it 5? I know there was some recounts being done.
5. Mm-hmm.
5. Okay, so 71 compared to 5. How does that happen?
Well, it's the first past the post system. That's the first answer. The second answer is because the LibDems focus their efforts in a small number of constituencies, whereas the vote share for Reform UK was right across the UK. So it was spread. It wasn't concentrated in seats. So Reform came second in I don't know, nearly 100 seats. But second doesn't cut it, because you don't get into Parliament if you're in second place under a first past the post system. So the LibDems have this obscene number of seats, 71, which, by the way, I have to say is more or less equivalent to their vote share. It's not far off their vote share. The difference with Reform is they only got 5 MPs, one of whom, of course, even in Australia, you will know him, Nigel Farage. But they only got 5 MPs into Parliament, despite a higher vote share than the LibDems. And one of the things that may come out of this election is an increasing drive now to do something about the British electoral system as a result, because the skewing of the results is the worst it has ever been in UK electoral history.
See, that's something that we discuss here in Australia, and there are some advocates for first past the post voting here in Australia, because our preferential system does favour the left side of politics. What are the options that the UK are looking at? Is a preferential system one of those that you would like to go to?
There are no plans currently. We had a referendum about this a few years ago, and the British people rejected a form of PR. But at the moment, there are no plans. I would suggest that there will be pressure following this election, because some of the results are so extreme. I mean, for Reform to achieve 5 MPs, having won a greater share of the votes than the LibDems, who got 71 MPs, is, shall we say, democratically a little obscene.
No, it is obscene. Neil Turner's made a comment in the chat. He said the French style could be the best. I don't know anything about the French style of voting. What do you have to say about that, Leigh?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always a bit reluctant to talk about the French, because they're a law unto themselves. So I'll pass on that one, if I may, Stephen.
Yeah, no problem at all. This second article that you've written, this is based more on Keir Starmer's result. And you can see in this graph, I mean, the Labor vote has barely changed. Basically, in 2019, their vote percentage was 31.1%. And in this election, it's gone up to 32.1%. So it's not like they had an overwhelming number of people moving across to their side. It's more so that they've just been able to hold their vote. Is that essentially what's happened?
I'd say that's a good summary. They've held their vote. They barely increased it. And this is why I say it's not really a Labour win. It's a Tory loss. So you look at that chart, and what you see is that Labour is not more popular than it was before the election compared to now. What has changed is if you look at the next chart, where we show the drop in the Conservative vote, and I don't know if you've got that, Stephen, but knowing you probably have. There you go. So a massive drop in the Conservative vote. Two reasons for that. One is that the Conservatives in the UK were perceived as not really representing Conservative members and voters. So if you just go back a couple of years, we had Boris Johnson, who was elected as our PM. He won a massive majority, 80 seats majority. He was then ousted, and the Conservative Party had an election. When I say the party, I mean the full party, the membership. And one of the candidates was Rishi Sunak. Another candidate was Liz Truss. Rishi Sunak was rejected by the Conservative membership in favour of Liz Truss. So Liz Truss then became Prime Minister. Within 45 days, she was ousted by Rishi Sunak and his colleagues, and he was appointed, never elected by the electorate. He was appointed as Prime Minister. And so if you're looking for answers, Stephen, one of the answers might be that the Conservative Party in Parliament simply increasingly lost touch with its membership and with the people across the country. So not just the members, but I'm talking about ordinary members of the public too.
It's amazing because we have a very, very similar situation here in Australia where a lot of Conservative people here feel that our Liberal Party, which essentially is meant to be our right-leaning party here in Australia, a lot of people feel disaffected with that party. They don't feel like that party is representing them. I see signs of that turning around, which is good under the leadership of Peter Dutton. It still has a long way to go, but here in Australia, we have obviously a federal Labor government. Interestingly, the primary vote for that government is also 32%. So Labor in both our countries are achieving the same primary result and still able to form government. We also have Labor governments in every single state seat around the country on the mainland. Tasmania is the only exception. But people think, oh, well, Labor's strong at the moment. They're actually very vulnerable. 32% primary vote is not a hell of a lot. I mean, you can get knocked off quite easily. And you now have this leader, Sir Keir Starmer, who went backwards in his own seat. He represents North London. Here in this article that you've written, you've said that his vote share has dropped by 15.6%. Is there a reason why that happened?
Nobody likes him very much.
I mean, this whole election has been like, you've got Rishi Sunak that no one likes. You've got Sir Keir Starmer, no one likes him. Labor's snuck through with 32% of the vote and been able to pick up over 400 seats, and it looks like a landslide. But you've got all these figures that no one likes, and the one person out there that who you might say has any sort of conviction and maybe any sort of popularity, Nigel Farage, his party's picked up 5 seats.
Yeah,
there's something that's very bizarre happening.
I think for Australian viewers, there's something that you need to understand, and that's that there has really only been one figure that has stood out in the election in terms of charisma and personality and interest. The one person that you would perhaps put down your coffee and watch on the TV, and that's Nigel Farage. So it doesn't matter whether you agree with his politics or not. But the other two, Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer, they bored for Britain, to be perfectly honest. Whereas Nigel, love him or loathe him, was compulsive viewing.
Yeah, well, he is. I mean, from our perspective here in Australia, we don't really see much of Rishi Sunak. I barely knew who Sir Keir Starmer was. We just get Nigel Farage, and they try and paint it here in Australia that he's going to have this huge victory. And I knew watching you and listening to your, reading your articles, I knew what the reality would be. But he's presented as almost like running for prime minister here in Australia, and I'm sure it's the same in other countries around the world. He just grabs that attention, and I think it's because he does speak with conviction, and he's been around for so long fighting those battles, and he's really stood up for what he believes in, and he's put in the hard work to do that. Before we get to Nigel and reform, we've got a comment here from one of the CIB UK listeners on YouTube, but I'm going to need you to explain this to me. Lisa87 says Keir Starmer is a bell end. What? We don't have that expression in Australia. What is a bell end?
Let me think how to translate that into what we call strine, Australian. An idiot.
Good.
Useless. I'm trying to think of polite terms here, Stephen. Useless.
Yeah. Okay. Good. I might have to steal that one. Now, Nigel Farage, he's won Clacton, which I think is an amazing effort. You've written here that Clacton had one of the. Sorry.
I was just going to say, it's worth talking about what he achieved there. I mean, it's quite extraordinary. And it's not been covered in the media yet. We covered it this morning, which you've picked up, which is great. But here is a seat that was fundamentally conservative, some 75%, I think it was, 72% conservative. And he stepped in with 4 weeks to go, and he's turned that round into a reform win with a majority. What's his majority? 8,500 votes. That is some kind of achievement, and only somebody that is a real standout conviction politician could have done something like that. So the organizations I chair are non-partisan, okay? And you know that, Stephen. But all I'm saying is that it's a dramatic achievement, regardless of what you think about the politics.
This Conservative member that he's knocked off, is it Giles Watling?
That's correct.
Was he unpopular? Was that part of it, or is this just the overwhelming charisma of Nigel Farage that has caused this result?
Well, one of the problems with the Conservative Party for years is CCHQ. CCHQ is Conservative Campaign Headquarters. And in the last 10 years or so, they've taken over the process of vetting and choosing candidates to be MPs. And because they're a bunch of, as some of my friends would say, raving lefties, or as Margaret Thatcher would have said, wets, they're now called, by the way, One Nation Tories, so that your Australian audience can pick that up if you read any articles about it. One Nation Tories. They simply do not represent the views of the average person in the street, nor do they represent, critically, the views of the membership of the Conservative Party. So those are two different things, clearly. You would expect that candidates and MPs would reflect the values of, at the very least, the membership of the party. you would then hope that they would further reflect the values of the country at large. Neither of those things are true.
This is a map. This is from The Economist. This is the map of the UK, and it shows all the results. Now, it's a bit hard to see because there are so many electorates, but I want to highlight the Reform results. So this one here is the first one, Ashfield. This is Lee Anderson. The Conservative there had 39% of the vote in 2019. That's gone down to 8%. I don't know how that happens. But Reform's picked that seat up with 43%. So, I mean, I can't even imagine something like that. Like, how does the Conservative Party fall that far? This is Richard Tice, who's the former leader. He stepped aside for Nigel. The Conservative there had 76% of the vote in 2019. That was reduced to 33%, and Richard's picked up 38%. These are just staggering results. The next one is Great Yarmouth. If I pronounce it wrong, what was it?
Yarmouth.
Okay. The Conservative went from 66% in 2019 to 25% in 2024. Rupert Lowe has won that for Reform with 35%.
Good man, Rupert. Yeah.
And the last one, obviously, we've been talking about Nigel Farage in Clacton, and we've mentioned how the Conservative had 72% in 2019. That's I don't know, 20. It's gone from 72 to 28%. I mean, here in Australia, we place so much focus on margins, and some of the margins are 5%, and that seems like a huge amount. And you know, it's such a big effort to be able to reverse a 5% margin. I mean, looking at the statistics here, these are going. I mean, how do you go from 76 down to the 20s? I mean, how is that even possible?
Yeah, I think one thing I would say to the Australian audience is what you're witnessing in the UK has been a pivotal election. It really has. And you won't become aware of just how important this election is for some time, because the stuff that we're churning out, which Stephen has kindly been mentioning, is just not appearing on the likes of the state broadcaster, the BBC, or on Sky News. By the way, Sky News, very different in the UK to Sky News Australia, okay? Completely different. Sky News here is essentially a left-wing channel. Sky News Australia, slightly different kettle of fish, shall we say. And I know that because I have Australian relatives. In fact, my only living relatives now are Australians. So I have a certain kinship with your country. I'm well aware of some of the differences. Linguistically, for example, you need to catch up. You call your right-wingers liberals, which is an insult to any right-winger in the UK. A liberal in the UK is a lefty, softy, lovey. The LibDems, the Liberal Democrats, for example. And no decent centre-right person would be seen anywhere near voting for that party. So we have different language, but was it Winston Churchill said we're a people unite? What did he say, Stephen? Help me out here. Okay, it was something like a people divided by a common language, or something like that. Anyway,
he said a lot of things, so it's hard to keep. Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry. It's been a very hard few weeks. So
no, I can imagine. I mean, I know what elections are like, particularly federal elections. I mean, it's a big effort. So I'm sure you're going to need a few days to recover. But knowing you never stop as well. So there's more articles to punch out and podcasts to do. I've got a comment here from Marie. Now, Maria says, Stephen, bellend is also a very rude word. Check it out in the English slang before you use it to describe someone. Well, I walked into that trap, didn't I? So thank you, Lisa, for that. You got me in trouble now. But I want to bring up this map as well, just quickly, because I think this is interesting as well. This is from CNN, of all places. Now, this shows how the seats in the UK have changed from 2017, 2019 and 2024. Obviously, we brought up the Labor vote and how significant that was, or at least the seats that they picked up. But down in the south of the country, you can see all these orange seats, which are the LibDems. Now, can you explain something to me? In here in Australia, the LibDems are now the Libertarian Party. Would you describe the LibDems in the UK as libertarian?
Absolutely the opposite. The LibDems in the UK are okay. I'm going to choose my words carefully because we are non-partisan. So I only comment with regard to the issues of independence, democracy, sovereignty, and freedom. I don't comment, and none of my teams comment on any other policies of any other party. So we're non-partisan to that extent. But when it comes to those issues of independence, sovereignty, democracy, freedom, then we do feel able to comment, because the LibDems did their level best to frustrate Brexit, to overturn Brexit. I personally can't forgive them for some of the dreadful things they did for years. They made my team's lives a misery trying to counter some of the nonsense that they came out with and are still coming out with. When it comes to issues like net zero, which I know there's a big discussion going on in Australia right now about net zero and about wind farms and solar farms and all the rest of it. LibDems, they are absolutely all for it. They're very close to Greens on issues like that. And completely different to Australia, Stephen, completely different.
Okay. Now, Pauline, one of our very loyal listeners and watchers, hello, Pauline. She's brought up this Churchill quote that you were trying to search for. Americans and British are one people separated by a common language.
Thank you, Pauline. That's what I was searching for in my adult brain. But the last few weeks, I haven't had a great deal of sleep. So,
now, one result I want to bring up, this is it was a bit of a surprise to me, is Liz Truss, and they call her lettuce Liz Truss. You might want to explain what that means for us here in Australia. But this article in the Daily Beast says that she's been humiliated in a shocking election defeat. Now, from what I've heard about Liz Truss was that she was small government, low tax, very conservative. Wouldn't that be a good thing? Why has she lost her seat?
Right. It's a very good question, Stephen. Why did she become Prime Minister? Because the membership of the Conservative Party liked her thinking. She was almost like a mini Thatcherite, in a sense. You're quite right. Small state, low tax, high growth, all of the things that many Conservative voters and, frankly, the population at large believe in. Coming to your question about lettuce, which is a good one, because I can understand how it would confuse people. That came about because she was in power for, I believe, 45 days. And somebody pointed out that that's about the shelf life of a lettuce in a supermarket.
That's interesting. If we look at her results, I mean, she's gone from 69% in 2019 to 25% in 2024. Mind you, she's only lost the seat by 1%, it seems. The Labor candidate, now member, had 26%. It's a huge fall from grace. Do you think she deserved that?
No, but we said at the beginning that one of the issues was the Reform Party coming in and growing strongly, despite having almost no money and almost no resources on the ground. They've done spectacularly well to win 14% of the vote overall. And in some constituencies, that's been enough to make the difference. And so when it comes to Liz Truss, for example, if there'd been no Reform Party candidate, she would have won no problem at all.
Well, let me ask you this question, because I think this would be interesting. If you did have a preferential system in the UK, and let's say hypothetically a lot of those Reform votes would have gone back to Conservatives, or the maybe if the Reform candidate was ahead of the Conservative, those Conservative votes flowed to the Reform Party, would it be a completely different result? Would we still see a Labor government?
If there hadn't been the Reform Party, it would have been very, very close, this election. And the reason I say that is simply that, as I pointed out earlier, the Labour Party barely increased its vote, barely, between 1% and 2%. We don't have the final exact figures yet, but between 1% and 2%. That is not what you would call a resounding victory. And our advice to Sir Keir Starmer is a little bit of hubris and, not to take for granted that his massive majority is based on popularity, because it clearly isn't. When it comes back to people like Liz Truss, I mean, she's not the only one. A Labour shadow, a very popular Labour shadow minister, a chap called Ashwood, he lost his seat. In his case, it was because of, we believe, because of the Muslim vote in his area, because Keir Starmer hasn't come out forcefully enough, in their view, against Israel. But one of the issues that we're going to be exploring in the coming couple of weeks is the extent to which sectarian politics has now entered the UK.
Here's a very good question from Mickey D. I was going to move on to Sir Keir Starmer, but I might ask this question first. If Reform and the Conservatives do not join forces, does this mean it's hard to beat Labor next time around?
Yes. That's my simple answer, Mickey. But I talk to senior politicians every week, and I'm not at liberty to discuss the conversations that I have. Otherwise, they wouldn't happen. So senior politicians know that they can talk to me anytime, and it goes no further. But I will just make a generic point about this, not in regard to any specific politician. And that is that there is a feeling amongst certain senior politicians that there should be discussions now with Nigel Farage about what happens going forward. That is
extremely interesting. How do the other Reform members, particularly Richard Tice, how does he fit in with that? Would he stay loyal to Nigel?
Well, the interesting thing with Reform members is they don't all think alike. I get on very well with all politicians of all colours and creeds. One of my friends, I think I can call him a friend, is Ben Habib, who's the deputy leader of Reform. and he has different views about proportional representation than Nigel does, his leader. So Reform is a broad church in that sense, and there will inevitably be a shakeout at some point on some of these issues. They will have to have a collective view if they're going to grow. But at the moment, it's a little bit fragmented. But what they do is they cut through and appeal to millions of people, which you can see from the results. For Reform UK to come out of nowhere and achieve 14% of the vote is really extraordinary. It's one of the elements that justifies why I said at the beginning that this is one of the weirdest elections in British electoral history in the last 100 years.
Neil Turner's made a comment in the chat, and this is a perspective from Australian politics. He said, Reform could fall apart just like One Nation. Now, One Nation is a minor party here in Australia who has had some electoral success in various states and federal elections throughout the last 25 years. And what often happens with One Nation members is they get elected, have a falling out with the leader, Pauline Hanson, and then they become independents. Is there a likelihood that could possibly happen with Reform, or is Nigel Farage that good of a leader that he'll be able to hold it all together?
That's a really tough call, actually, Stephen. Nigel is a fantastic leader. Regardless of what you think of his policies, I've got a lot of time for him as a person because he's sincere and he's a conviction politician. And there are other conviction politicians I know whose policies I most definitely do not agree with, but I love them because they're conviction politicians. So Nigel is that. And if you want to be led by somebody, you want to be led by somebody with conviction. It's a bit like if you're going into battle in war, you've got to trust the man leading you. So I think Nigel's got that in his favour. On the other hand, he's got some very big egos to deal with. And whether or not he can bring those through, I don't know, is the simple answer. I will know more in the coming few weeks.
Well, it'll be very interesting. He's a bit of a firecracker sort of character, so anything could happen. But you mentioned with Sir Keir Starmer hubris, and that's something that he's really going to have to deal with in the coming weeks and months and years ahead. This is what he had to say when he was elected.
You campaigned for it, you fought for it, you voted for it, and now it has arrived. Change begins now.
Now, change can mean a lot of things. You can have bad change as well. What do you suspect is going to happen now in Britain with a Labor government with such a big majority in the Parliament?
Okay, another good question. Let me just start by saying that if you look at Labour's vote share and if you look at the turnout, Labour got about 20% support from the British people. So although the headline figure is whatever it is, 33%, 32%, if you actually look at the incredibly low turnout, they got support from about 20% of the electorate, something like that. That is hardly a ringing endorsement. And I think that's a very important point to make.
But essentially, they are now in government and they can almost do what they like in the Parliament to push through certain legislation. Are there any concerns that you might have about particular policies that they've proposed? Yeah,
I mean, we've described the result as one-party state politics, which may sound a little extreme to Australian viewers, but effectively, when you're sitting on 412 MPs, even if 100 of them decide to rebel for whatever reason, and by the way, the Labour Party has a long history of rebellious MPs. But even if 100 rebelled, Keir can still walk it on any bills he wants to put through the House of Commons. And he will also be backed by the House of Lords, unlike the Conservative government for the last few years, because the Lords is packed with left-wingers or Social Democrats. And so sometimes the government has struggled, as with the Rwanda policy of, to tackle illegal immigration. The government has struggled to get certain pieces of legislation onto the statute book because of the House of Lords. So Keir is unlikely to have that problem.
Mickey D on the CIBUK YouTube has also made another really good comment. He said, "I feel that Reform have the capacity to take significant votes from Labor, but these games will be diluted if not combined with other Conservatives." Now, speaking of the Conservative leader, Rishi Sunak, who's no longer the leader, this was his comments after the election.
"I have heard your anger, your disappointment, and I take responsibility for this loss. To all the Conservative candidates and campaigners who worked tirelessly but without success, I'm sorry that we could not deliver what your efforts deserve."
Now, he's saying sorry, but my biggest question is, why is his wife standing in the background like that? Is that normal in the UK?
It is, in fact, yes. I think there should have been one of those health warnings about getting migraines from looking at her dress. I'm sorry, that's very cruel. I'm sure she's a lovely woman. She is the daughter of a multi-billionaire Indian businessman. Rishi Sunak is worth about, I believe, about 0.6 billion. The richest prime minister, I believe, we've ever had. They have a lovely penthouse apartment on Ocean Boulevard in Santa Monica in California. And I would imagine that, and I think it would be understandable if Rishi wants to take his family over there as soon as he can. Now, I need to just correct you on one small point. He is still leader of the Conservative Party. He has not stood down. What he's done is apologised, but he said he'll stick around for the Conservative Party to elect his successor. Now, there is a very interesting tale that will come in the future.
Do you have any insights or feelings of what might happen there? Is there anyone that you can point to who may be the leader? Because one of the things that got through to us here in Australia, people couldn't work out why he called an early election, and one of the theories going around was that there was some internal mutterings within the Conservative Party, maybe some manoeuvrings to bring in Nigel Farage as Conservative leader. And the reason why Sunak went to an early election was to cut that off straight away. Firstly, is there any truth to that from what you've heard? And could Nigel Farage possibly be brought in as Conservative leader, or is it too far out yet for that to happen?
Can I quote from an old BBC political series and say, you might say that, but I couldn't possibly comment? I'm not sure if that series, Yes Minister or Yes Prime Minister, made it to Australia. I'm pretty sure it must have done.
Yeah, it did.
But that would be my comment there. Going forward, it's a bit of a tricky one. I'm a bit limited, to be honest, Stephen, in what I can say, but I think, shall we say, we live in interesting times.
I think that's probably the best answer. You can't give it all away. I know we love to do that on podcasts like this and be the first ones to break something or to talk about ideas, but sometimes, truth is stranger than fiction, and there's a lot of rumors flying around. But when something does happen, it does catch people off guard, and that can have the biggest impact. So, speaking of Nigel Farage, this is what he had to say after he was elected for Clacton.
I will say this: it's 4 weeks and 3 days since I decided to come out of retirement and throw my hat in the ring. I think what Reform UK has achieved in those just few short weeks is truly extraordinary. Given that we had no money, no branch structure, virtually nothing across the country, we are going to come second in hundreds of constituencies.
It truly is a remarkable performance by Reform. What is holding them back? Or is there anything holding Reform back going forward? Could they maybe one day outpace the Conservatives?
Money. It really is that simple. Money and organisation. Now, those are two different things. Both of them take a long time to build. I know. I'm a businessman, not a politician. So I know a lot about raising money. Worked in venture capital for some years. It doesn't happen overnight. But even more complex is how you build an organisation. And you've then, below Nigel, who is, a super ego figure, if you like, you've then got to have a substructure and people that accept the way he is. And you've then got to have a management structure below that. These things take a long time to build. And then you've got all the individual local associations. So I think it's going to take a while. But you asked me for an exclusive and I couldn't give it to you because I'm not able to disclose personal conversations. But one thing I can tell you, Stephen, and your audience, which isn't exclusive, is about who funded the Labour Party to this win. Is that something that you think you'd be interested in?
No, I think it's very significant because I know here in Australia that it's perceived that our Conservative Party here gets all of the funding from big business and they have all the money, but it's actually not the case. I mean, they're well funded by the unions and a lot of super funds and things like that. But how is it in the UK?
Well, we've started delving into the detail of the funding of the political parties during the election campaign. And I can present exclusively to the commanding the narrative viewers in Australia some of our findings, if you'd like me to, Stephen.
Yeah, definitely, please.
What we looked at was the data we had available for the first 3 weeks of our UK election campaign. And the total came to just over £13 million. And Stephen, you're going to have to translate that into dollars for me.
Was it 13 million pounds?
13 million pounds.
Okay. Give me a moment.
I thought you could do that in your head, Stephen.
I can't do it in my head. It's about 24.6 million Australian dollars.
Okay, so about 25 million.
Pretty much, almost double, yeah.
Right. So we looked at this. Who was funding the parties in the first few weeks of the campaign? Now, we expected that the Conservative Party traditionally would have got the lion's share of the funding. No. The Labour Party got almost 9.5 million out of the 13 million. So if we double that, that's about 19 million Australian dollars. So they got about 80% of the total funding available to political parties.
But weren't they going to win anyway?
Well, this is what's interesting, because we made a point in a piece that we are going to be publishing tomorrow. Again, this is an exclusive for the Commanding the Narrative viewers, that the biggest donor was a chap called Lord Sainsbury. He's from the Sainsbury family. I don't know whether, I can't remember if you've got Sainsbury's supermarkets in the UK, but it's one of the biggest supermarket chains in the UK. It's called Sainsbury's. And we made the point that he gave 2.5 million, that's about 5 million Australian dollars, to the Labour Party, of all things. Normally you'd expect somebody like Lord Sainsbury to be giving it to the Conservatives. No, he gave it to the Labour Party. It was the largest single donation that we've been able to track down in the first few weeks of the campaign. And so this whole question of who funded Labour's victory, well, I can tell your audience, if they want to click on Facts4EU.org tomorrow morning, they will get the full Monty, the full SP, and then you'll know.
Look, people should be clicking on the Facts4EU every single day, because you're constantly releasing articles and information and research like this. Mickey D says in the chat, that's £9 million is approximately £1 for each vote they got. So I don't know how close that is. We've got
yeah, I think Mickey might well be not far off, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. That's a lot of money. Now, I've got a couple other comments here. You've got a very intelligent audience and at CIBUK, as is the Commanding the Narrative audience as well. So it's a good little union that we have tonight. Sovereign Joe says Andrew Bridgen is a truth megaphone with regards to COVID. He means COVID. But unfortunately, he has lost his seat or pushed out by the crooked establishment. Do you have any comments on that one, Leigh?
Yeah, I've got a lot of time for Andrew in terms of COVID. No question. But yes, he got pushed out, as did, more than 200 others. He was sitting as an independent at the end and realistically had no chance. But in terms of him being forthright about COVID, I know we're not talking about COVID today. He was excellent in some of the stuff that he came through with, and he was fearless. And personally, I like fearless people. I like people that step out and put their necks on the line. So that's my view.
So if he was standing as an independent, should he have potentially joined Reform?
I think if he had, I think he would have had a chance. But he's a real character, Andrew Bridgen, and certainly loyalties to the Conservative Party. I think he would have had a real problem in standing as a Reform candidate. I also think they would have had a problem with him because he's quite outspoken And he had one or two issues, which is why he had to step down as a Conservative.
Another comment just quickly. I think this is a very important thing to discuss. This is from John Jones. Starmer's political capital is extremely thin. The Tories can and will bounce back if Starmer fails to deliver. It's not wise to write off the Tories after one day. Is there truth with that, or is the addition of reform now holding that sentiment back?
No, I think John Jones has got a very good point there. That if you look at the composition of Starmer's new cabinet, then objectively, and this is not a party political comment at all, but objectively, there's not a whole lot of people there that are impressive. So goodness knows what they're going to come up with in the next few weeks or few months. So I'd say to John Jones, no, you can't write off the Conservative Party. I do, however, think that in order to progress, either the Conservative Party has to change radically, which means wiping out CCHQ. I suggest they all look for other jobs right now. And in fact, I told them that the other day, by the way. I told them to put their CVs out there. The CCHQ is Conservative Campaign Headquarters, by the way, for our Australian audience. So either there is a radical shake-up, and by the way, there is an organisation which I want to give a quick name check to, if I may, Stephen, called the Conservative Democratic Organisation, which is headed up by a couple of friends of mine. The president is Lord Peter Cruddas, and the chairman is the former MEP David Campbell Bannerman. And they were set up when Boris Johnson was deposed, because they felt that there was no democratic involvement, and they were quite right, no democratic involvement at all from the Conservative Party membership. And either we believe in democracy or we don't. That's my view. I don't mind if democracy goes against me. I have no problem with that. I just believe that we fought so hard over so many years to establish democracy as a founding principle in our countries that we cannot let it go.
John Jones has followed up. He says, agree with Leigh, the Wets or One Nation Tories are finished. A couple of other comments. Maybe you'll be able to answer this one quickly. This is from Neil. Is Starmer left or right Labor?
If you believe what he's published recently, then he's centre-right Labour. The reality is that when you go back, as we've done, he's full left-wing Labour.
Okay. We are getting to the end now, but we've also got another interesting thing to discuss. Actually, I wanted to discuss this in the beginning, but we moved past it. But it's good that silence is golden. Let's put this in the YouTube. The Tories are done. We can't go flip-flopping between Labor and Conservative. It must be reform, and I predict reform will grow to power in 5 to 10 years. I think that's a good comment. I mean, it's the same problem here in Australia. When the Conservative government, which is the Liberal Party here, goes badly, people flop to Labor. When Labor goes bad, people flop back to the Conservatives, and it just goes back and forth and back and forth. Why do the majority of the voting public, and I think apathy is a big problem, they're just not paying attention enough, but why do they flip-flop between those two parties? Do we really have to be in a two-party system, or is it time to step out of that and look at other parties?
Okay, two answers to that. One is no, we don't have to. It's a question of, is there a choice? And until reform came along, no, there wasn't a choice. We had the Brexit Party, but then they stood down in order to let Boris Johnson get his majority of 80 seats. So this election is the first time that the public had a voice. When I say the public, I mean public who have traditional values and are not left-wing. So that would be my first point on it. Is it possible that we could see a new party, i.e. Reform UK, growing over the next 5 years? Well, I can tell you one thing. Nigel Farage is entirely committed to the next 5 years of growing the Reform Party. And so that's going to be very interesting. Ordinarily, I'd say, no, there isn't room for another party in British politics, because I've been around long enough. I've seen parties come, I've seen them go, not going to happen. But when it comes to Nigel Farage, a man that has survived a car crash, a plane crash, and cancer, and 30 years battling to free the United Kingdom from the European Union, and doing so successfully in the end, I'm not going to write him off.
I think what I've seen in the US with Trump is it did seem to grow other leaders like you might say Vivek Ramaswamy or Ron DeSantis and some others. There definitely seems to be some options there now. It does. I think with leadership, once you take that first step through the door, others will stand up and follow. Hopefully we can see the same thing here in Australia, because we need some sort of political reform and leadership here in this country as well. We're just we don't seem to have that Nigel Farage figure or that Donald Trump figure here yet. Hopefully it does happen. To finish up, because I think we've covered a lot of ground tonight and we've discussed all the issues. I think the next thing people are going to be looking at is what happens from here. Do you have a lot of positive feeling around the direction of the UK at the moment? I know the Labor government, some people might be very afraid of a Labor government, particularly with a left-leaning leader like Keir Starmer. Is there still hope for the UK, or do you think you might need to go through a bit of pain first before you can come out the other side?
I'm always full of hope. I'm a glass half full person. I'm always an optimist. I wouldn't have got through 15 cancer operations otherwise. So the answer, Stephen, is yeah, I'm positive about the UK. I think the UK is still set to be a great friend to Australia. I want to say that to your audience, that finally we have been freed to be the kind of friend we once were to Australia, to the Australian people. And I look forward to seeing that develop over the next few years in the trade agreement that we've signed, which is a fabulous agreement, I think, with the AUKUS agreement that we've signed with Australia, the UK, and the US. I think there's a lot that our great nations can do together. And so am I positive? Yes. Am I a little disturbed by some of the members of Keir Starmer's cabinet? I can't deny it. On some of the policies that relate to our fundamental principles of independent sovereignty, democracy, and freedom, of course, I'm a bit nervous about that. Will we get through that? Yes, we will. And if we can, if there is a realignment in British politics, which there may well be in the next 2 years, then all bets are off, and it will be very interesting, and you can have me back on to talk about it. When it comes to Australia, I can just tell you that the British people 100% behind some of the moves that are taking place in Australia right now. We're delighted at the result of your recent referendum, which was absolute nonsense, but delighted about that. And we just hope that you get some figures standing up now for the values, traditional values that Aussie Blakes and Sheilas believe in. Do forgive my accent, by the way.
Very, very good. Well, I do encourage everyone to head to Facts4EU.org. As Leigh said, tomorrow there'll be an article come out about the funding that the Labor Party received. I'm sure it's going to be a cracking bit of research, and it's going to be a very well-written article. I mean, since I've known you, Leigh, you've been sending me your daily articles, and I've found that I'm reading it. I think they're fantastic. They're straight to the point. There's no garbage. There's no opinion. It's just, I mean, there is opinion at the end, but it's old school journalism. It's facts at the top, and it's research. It's facts. It's tables. It's quotes. It's some really interesting, good stuff. You cut through a lot of the garbage and you get straight to the point. So I'm really enjoying it, following your work. I encourage people to also head to CIBUK, which I'm sure a lot of the viewers are already well aware of in the UK. But look, mate, you're doing some fantastic work. I know you're battling cancer at the moment, but you're still somehow managing to do all this work, getting through an election. I know how tough it is and how much work's involved and how much you don't sleep during those periods, but somehow you've managed to do it, and I really appreciate you coming on tonight. You're a fabulous guest, and your analysis is really good. You're way across it, and thank you very much for coming on tonight.
Well, can I just say we love Australia, all the members of my team, and so we just hope that we can carry on working together more and more going forward in the future.
Yes, definitely. Silence is golden says get well soon, Leigh. So I'm sure a lot of the other viewers feel the same way. If you want to follow Commanding the Narrative, as I said in the beginning, there's now a new website. Head to commandingthenarrative.com and you can stay up to date with all the podcasts that we do, Commanding the Narrative, the ex-candidates, the Global Discussion Forum. It's all there. All my articles, I mean, I have been published on Leigh's site. I've also been published in The Spectator Australia as well. All of this is going to be going up on this website, Command the Narrative. All you need to do is click that little button up the top where it says sign up, and you can get to a weekly mailing list. I'll send out all the latest news and info and everything. So you can stay up to date. You don't have to rely on social media and the shadow banning that goes on there to get our content. So thank you, Leigh. Thank you to the audience. It's been a great episode. All the best for the UK. I know it is daunting having a Labor government, but they say it's always darkest before the dawn. So hopefully it's not as bad as what you may fear. And I
just want to say one more thing, Stephen. I encourage all your Australian viewers to sign up to your website and to donate to you as well. I've known you for a few years. You're a thoroughly fine, decent man, very trustworthy and very interesting as well with the stuff that you publish. You're halfway around the world from me, but I respect what you do. So I would urge the Australian audience to view your website, your new website, and to sign up.
Yeah, thank you very much, Leigh. You've always been a great supporter of mine. I really do appreciate it. I appreciate everyone for watching. As I say it every single time, please share this out if you know of anyone who may be interested in this comprehensive analysis that we've just done, please share it out, or any of our content, you can share it out to people. We really do rely on the audience to do things like that. But for everyone that has watched tonight, for everyone who's going to watch in the future, thank you very much. We definitely need to have more conversations like this to explain the political system to people, because being involved in the political system is extremely important, and it's the only way we're going to get our countries back and live in a much better world. So thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you all next time.